The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. This is Maggie from the Active Transportation Alliance, and thanks for joining us today. We're back with the Illinois Public Health Institute for our second webinar in our three-part webinar series that's designed to help applicants across the state develop successful walking, biking, and trail ITEP proposals. So in July, we provided an introduction to ITEP, to the funding opportunity. And today we'll be providing insights about proposal scoring and walk you through each section of the application. So we'll be recording this webinar today in case you need to jump off or if you wanted to share it with others. You are all muted. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, feel free to use the chat, and Sarah from IPHI will help you out. And also use the chat if you have any questions that come up during the webinar today, and we'll get to those at the end of the webinar. So my name is Maggie Schwinski. I'm an advocacy manager at Active Trans, and Melody Geraci is joining me. She's our deputy executive director. And for those who aren't aware of who we are, we're a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to advocate for walking, biking, and public transit to create healthy, sustainable, equitable communities. So I'm going to turn it over to Melody to talk more about how this webinar came to be.
Thanks, Maggie. Can you hear me, Maggie?
Yeah.
Just to make sure. Okay, great. So hi, everyone. I'm Melody from Active Trans. And the reason we're able to be here today and to bring you this great information is all thanks to an initiative called ISPAN, which stands for the Illinois State Physical Activity and Nutrition Program. It's a 5-year initiative, and the goal is to find ways to help people get more physically active and to have better nutrition in communities all across Illinois. It's a statewide initiative. The focus is on low-income and rural communities, so we're in a number of different kind of high focus areas around the state. The funding originally comes from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and they have been leaders over the last 15 or 20 years in really taking the public health perspective and applying it to the community setting. So understanding that it's more effective to help communities become places where making healthy choices is natural and easy, rather than trying to get one person at a time to eat better and get more physically active. As Maggie mentioned, and Sarah is from the Illinois Public Health Institute, they are the main grant recipients on this project, and we work for them as the Built Environment Technical Assistance Provider. So the built environment goal, there are a number of different, as you saw on the previous slide, a number of different focus areas, including breastfeeding and other areas. But the physical activity and built environment goal is to really try and get places that people want to go connected to each other by routes and facilities that are active transportation friendly. So again, the goal is to try and make as many trips as people take in their regular daily lives amenable and accessible and easy and convenient and safe to take by walking, biking, or using a trail rather than jumping in the car. Again, this is a three-part webinar series on the Illinois Transportation Enhancements Program, which we're going to talk about in great depth. And we also were able through this funding to put together a learning collaborative of 15 different communities to give them more in-depth and one-on-one peer-to-peer learning and technical assistance from our perspective to help them prepare really excellent proposals for the ITEP program. And they're all on the call today. The webinar series, again, the first webinar recording is online on our website at activetrans.org/ITEP, along with a whole bunch of other great tools and resources. Today is part 2, and part 3 will be on October 21st, and that's about midway, a little more than midway through the call for projects period. That we wanted to get one more in just before proposals are due, but also to start talking about what the next steps are if you are indeed successful with your proposal and you are funded for your project. Okay, so today's agenda, we're going to go back over a few of the main points from the first webinar, which was kind of the introduction to ITEP and what its goals are. Then we're going to go into the first section of in-depth focus on this proposal. It's the proposal itself, the application itself, which is the scoring mechanism. We're going to talk about how the proposals will be scored, including this new geographic mapping tool that you'll be required to complete. Then we'll go step by step through each section of the application. Maggie's going to talk a little bit about what a sunset clause is, and then we'll take time for Q&A. On to you, Maggie.
Thanks, Mel. So ITEP, this program is administered by the Illinois Department of Transportation. It is one of the biggest funders of walking, biking, and trail projects that our state has. And this funding cycle happens every 2 years. The call for proposals opened last week, August 21st, and it is 10 weeks long, the call for proposals, so it closes November 2nd. It's a reimbursable grant program, which we'll talk more about that in a moment. And so the amount of money in this fund this year, this cycle, is $105.6 million. 30.6 million of that comes from federal funding, and 75 million comes from state funding. So previously, ITEP only had federal funding, so it was around this $30 million mark in previous cycles, and this is the first year it includes the state funding. So it's a much bigger pot of money to spread out throughout the state, and we're very excited about that. We, in our last webinar, we got a lot of great questions from all of you about, there's a lot of interest in the grant this year. So we started an FAQ. We worked with IDOT. We've been working with some staff at IDOT throughout this whole process. They've been helping us put these presentations together and make sure we're sharing the correct information, but they helped us develop this FAQ based on all of your questions. So you can check it out at activetrans.org/ITEP, and we will be mentioning that website throughout this webinar because there are other resources there. So write that URL down so you have easy access. But there's several different, it's categorized, the FAQ. So if you have a specific question about local match or reimbursement or project eligibility, you can go there for more information. So we also will be using acronyms throughout this webinar. So we just wanted to make sure you're comfortable, familiar with the acronyms in case this is all new to you. So ITEP stands for the grant, the Illinois Transportation Enhancement Program. IDOT is our State Department of Transportation. FHWA, Federal Highway Administration, that's at the federal level. We might reference your MPO or RPC, so that would be your Metropolitan Planning Organization or your Regional Planning Commission. Your COG, so this would be your Council of Government or your Council of Mayors. And then IDOT has a couple manuals that we will be talking about, their Bureau of Design and Environment manual and their Bureau of Local Roads and Streets manual. Phase 1 engineering and phase 2 engineering, we'll be mentioning that. And then finally, the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. So just for your reference. So now I want to talk more about scoring. So there are 2 scores that you need to be aware of. There's the application score and the community score. Both are out of 100 points. The application score focuses solely on the merits of your project, and that's based on a set of criteria which we'll review. And all projects need to score at least 52 points out of 100 points total to be considered for funding. So the community score is a separate score, and it's based on several factors, including poverty level and median income. And once all applications are submitted to IDOT, this community score is used to determine your local match. And it is used to ensure that 25% of total ITEP funds go to qualifying proposals in high need communities. So we'll talk more about that as well. So here is how these scores are determined. The application score goes through a series of reviews. So there's an initial review, which evaluates your proposal's general eligibility, your project's eligibility, and IDOT makes sure, for example, that you've met all of your GATA pre-qualification requirements, and that all of those documents have been submitted. And they also are going to be looking at your cost estimate to make sure there are no significant errors or issues. So once a project is considered eligible, then your proposal is assigned multiple reviewers for a more comprehensive review where projects are scored out of 100 points. Reviewers include IDOT districts, MPOs, RPCs, other state agencies, and other IDOT staff. And a minimum of 3 reviewers will review your proposal. And those scores are averaged to determine your application score. And then a final approval process happens where a selection committee from IDOT makes the final decision on which proposals will be awarded funding. And then the community score that is generated by a community mapping tool, which is available in the application. So now digging into the project score. So applications are scored on several criteria, which will review those criteria. And from what we know, the following items, they're given around 8 to 10 points each for a total score of 100 points. And we've been told the scores are fairly evenly distributed between the categories, though we don't know the exact amounts, the exact number of points awarded to each category. So here are half of the categories that you'll be evaluated on. So first one is project eligibility. So some questions to ask yourself here is, does your project meet the eligibility requirements that are outlined in the ITEP guidelines? So for example, your project needs to have a transportation focus. It shouldn't be a recreational trail, and it should not be a maintenance project. And then another question to ask is, have you completed all of the GATA information? And for more details about what projects are eligible, you could listen to the recording of our last webinar. We went into detail on this. You can review the FAQ because a lot of people had some specific questions about their particular project that they were thinking of applying for on that Active Trans website. You could review, IDOT has their guidelines and other FAQ information on their website. That's another great resource. But if that doesn't help, because we know it's often a case-by-case basis, check with your local IDOT district ITEP coordinator for more clarity on whether your project is eligible. So second category is the strength of your project's relationship to transportation. So IDOT wants to know that your project is truly for transportation, and it's important in your proposal to make this very clear. So your project should connect people to destinations or a larger transportation network, and again, make sure to clearly explain that in your application. Third is your project needs to meet the category intent. So there are 9 ITEP categories that are outlined in the guidelines. And if you're applying for a walking project, biking project, or a trail project, it should be relatively clear which category you fall into. Only one category in your application should be selected, and the application does say that some projects fall into more than one category, but you should be checking the one most relevant category. 4 is public benefits and accessibility. This is in your proposal, making clear that the project is on public property and that ADA compliance has been addressed. So how will your project improve accessibility for people? And then number 5 is cost effectiveness. So does your project have high public benefits compared to the costs? So how many people will be impacted by your project? So for example, say one project costs $2 million and it only benefits a small number of people versus a project that is $2 million that benefits a larger population, that second project will likely, in this category, score higher. Next is project support and local commitment. So you should be able to show strong support from the community in your application through additional documentation that you could submit. So this includes documentation about public meetings and participation and output, survey results, survey information about gathering community input, or letters of support from local groups. And then is your project in a local, state, or regional plan? So if it is, make sure to include that information in your proposal. If it's not specifically mentioned, there are, you could look for plans that state there is a community or regional goal to improve walking and biking. If you find that, make sure to include that in this section. So IDOT has said inclusion in an existing plan does help show that you're committed to the project, especially, this is especially true for larger scale projects that might need to be completed in multiple segments or over multiple funding periods. All right, so the next set of categories to be thinking about for scoring, connectivity to existing facilities. So in your application, again, make sure to outline how does your project help improve the active transportation network. So is it connecting to other paths, other bike lanes, sidewalks? Is it providing access to public transit? And then prior sponsor investment. So this is looking at your financial commitment to the project. So for previous projects, IDOT looks at were you able to provide matching funds? Have other segments of the project already been completed? Have you been able to cover some of the costs of the early work that were required for the project? So in general, IDOT prefers projects that feel like they are more likely, or that will be more likely to be completed. So they don't want to commit funds to projects that won't be able to move forward because of a lack of support or really interest in the project. And of course, this year is different because not all projects will require a local match. Some will have a 0% local match, some will have a 10% local match. And this will be taken into account in the scoring. And but one thing to know is sponsors do have to cover maintenance costs for whatever project they build. So this particular category will help them rate that particular criteria. So next is project sponsor capacity and past performance. So this looks at both financial and non-financial resources. So have you put in the effort to complete a detailed cost estimate? We'll talk more about that later. And have you shown a history of, if you've won ITEP funding before, have you shown a history of completing the project in a timely manner? Have maintenance costs been considered in your application for the project? And then next is project readiness, another category. So this looks at planning and coordination that you've done regarding to the project up to date. So have you considered right-of-way or land acquisition, and the timeline for acquiring land if it's required, because that can often take a significant amount of time. Have you considered any environmental issues or clearances that may be needed? Have you coordinated, if a railroad is involved, have you started that coordination process? Because that's another thing that can take a long time. So IDOT is looking for sponsors that are showing that they've started the initiative and started moving things forward. And if it's applicable, you can get additional points for if land acquisition has already happened. Same for phase 1 engineering if it's completed. And then finally, they're just looking for a complete application. Make sure that you are submitting all of the required information, that you've filled in everything, that you don't have any blank questions. So again, all of this, there's a list of what's considered in the project score in the ITEP guidelines, section I. There's not a lot of detail about, what how the point system works, but just know again that each of these categories are worth around 8 to 10 points for a total of 100 points. So a few additional tips for your project score. So your project needs to serve a transportation need, and so making sure to show how it connects people to destinations. Your project can't be solely for recreation, and your project also can't be for routine maintenance projects such as restriping a trail or a bike lane, or cleaning up debris, or repairing a broken or cracked sidewalk or curb. Sidewalk projects, we just wanted to bring this up again. So new sidewalks are eligible, reconstructing sidewalks are eligible as well, but you need to show that there are improvements to accessibility to ADA. Projects are capped at $2 million. So for large projects, this may mean applying for funding in segments or from multiple funding sources. Having a good cost estimate is very important. You'll want an engineer or firm to complete this for you, and we'll go into more detail on that later. And a reminder that this is a reimbursable grant program. If looking at both engineering and construction, so with engineering, as well as with land acquisition and utility relocation, a project sponsor has to pay those costs up front. So the project costs, including the local match, are then reimbursed by IDOT in accordance to a joint funding agreement. And this can be done in a lump sum at the end of the project, in progressive billing, or in equal payments. Construction is a little different. So for construction, either IDOT or the project sponsor can pay for upfront construction costs. So if you had IDOT do the construction lettings, then they would pay for the upfront construction costs. And this is often easier and preferred in many cases, but there's a lot more detail about this information we got from IDOT directly on that activetrans.org/ITEP webpage. So bundling project elements, you could do this. So focus on one category. So there are the 9 categories. So bundle project elements from the same category into one proposal. And then also consult IDOT's manuals, the design standards. So when you're envisioning your project, so that would be IDOT's Bureau of Design and Environment Manual and their Local Roads and Streets Manual. Make sure that your project is in alignment with what's allowed. And if you are, if you'd like to propose a facility that is included in, say, NACTO or another well-respected design guideline, IDOT recommends getting in touch with your IDOT district's local road office staff prior to submitting the application to talk through that And then lastly here, which phases should you include in your project? We've been getting a lot of questions from people about this. In general, IDOT prefers applications that show the project is more likely to move towards completion. So keep that in mind. If you, so having a proposal that includes construction is ideal. If you need to include phase 1 engineering in your application, IDOT recommends bundling that, so including phase 1 and 2 engineering and construction in one application if possible, as long as the total cost is under $2 million. So if your project exceeds $2 million, you can consider applying for the project in segments. If you can't bundle construction into your project proposal, that's okay. The next best approach would then be to apply for phase 1 and 2 engineering at the same time. So IDOT has also indicated that phase 1 engineering, if you were to only apply for that, that is best for very large projects. All right, so now I'm gonna dig into the community score. So the other score that's also out of 100 points. So again, high need communities and the local match levels will be determined using IDOT's community mapping tool, which is an interactive map in the ITEP application. Once all applications are submitted, then 25% of the total ITEP funds will be awarded to qualifying proposals in line with their community score. So, so the important thing to note here is that you will not know your local match until after all applications are submitted and reviewed. So a little more detail here now about this community score and how that local match is determined based on 4 factors. So IDOT is going to be looking at your community size, your property tax base, your poverty level, and the median household income around your project. Poverty level and the median household income, the last 2 are the most important factors for your final score calculation. And the calculation is based on census tract data, and it includes all census tracts within a half-mile buffer of where your project is located. So if a project goes through multiple tracts, the tract with the highest need will then determine the overall score. So in one community, you could have several different scores depending on what census tracts your project hits. So I want to go into a bit more detail about this calculation to help you get a better sense of where you will fall compared to other communities. So we're going to start with the community size. So apologies if this gets a little wonky. And if it does, don't worry about it. Just focus on the blue numbers on the screen, so the weighted points. But for each of the four scoring criteria that I just mentioned, each of those scores is given a base score, which are the points in black there. And then those are multiplied by a weight for a weighted score, which are the points listed in blue. Your community score will be, or the community size score will be based on a combination of the populations of the census tracts that your project hits. So for example, if you're using this chart, if your project area has a total population of say 45,000 people, you would look at this chart and you would see your total weighted score would be 7.5. So that would be 7.5 out of a total of 15 possible points. And then the next factor for calculating the community score is your revenue tax per capita. So here's a look at how points are divided by the property tax rate. And the maximum score here is also 15. But we wanted to focus again more on the poverty level and the median household income, because these 2 scores are the most important factors for determining your overall score, and will give you a better sense of how you likely rank compared to others. So there are 3,100 census tracts in Illinois, and we were able to determine the percentage of census tracts for each of the different that fall into each of the 5 scoring tiers. So then you can kind of look at that and see how you compare to others. So only 5% of census tracts in the state have a poverty level between 40% and 100%. So if you get one of those scores of 21, 28, or 35, your community score is quite high compared to other community scores. So compared to 95 other census tracts, 95% of other census tracts. So, and also I would say if you have a poverty level between 20% and 40%, in your project area, you also have a relatively high score, because only 20% of census tracts fall into that tier. So median household income, we also broke down each of these tiered points by census tract. And if you have, for example, a median income of under 40,000 in your project area, you would get the maximum number of points here, which is 35, and there's 19% of census tracts fall into that category. So that this just gets you an idea of what your score will look like compared to other communities. And of course, there's no guarantee where exactly you'll fall, but I wanted to dig into one example just so you can get perhaps a better sense of how this works. So if you look here, this is an example in Peoria. If you look, for example, at below poverty level, which is the column in the middle, and if you look at the score, so the scores range from 1 to 3 here, and 3 is the highest score in this area, and you can see here there's, I don't know how many, is that 10 census tracts that this project intersects. So 3 is the highest poverty level score, so that's going to be the score that's used to calculate to go into your final community score. So this score is weighted for a total weighted score of 21. And again, if this is too much detail for you, that's fine. Like, all you need to focus on is the orange number, your final total community score. But all scores are added up for that final score. This community, it has a final score of 75.5, which is quite high. And this is my own opinion, but I would assume this project would, because it has both a high poverty level score and a high median household income score, it's going to be rather competitive compared to other projects. So this community, again, there's no guarantee, but it would be more likely to see a lower local match requirement. And again, that's my opinion, but I would say focusing in on the poverty level, your poverty level score and your median household income score, if you have a point of 21, 28, or 35, your score is quite high. So wanted to dig a little bit more into how to use that mapping tool. And after this, then Melody will start walking us through the actual application. But I'm
going to answer one quick, I'll give you a second to take a breath, Maggie. Answer one quick question. There was a question as to whether this is 2010 or 2020 census data, and the answer is 2010. And we'll get to some of your other questions a little later.
Great, thanks, Mel. So the mapping tool, the good news is it is relatively straightforward to use. When you log into the ITEP application, you'll go to the My Community Score page, which will bring you to a map. And here you can enter your community name in the search map bar, or you could zoom in and out using the plus and minus to get to your project area. And then you can draw your project. So you click in the legend, you would click either project point or project line, and you can click on the map to draw a point or a line. And some examples of when would you use a point versus when would you use a line. So the project point, if you have some pedestrian crossings in your proposal, some benches, curb bump outs, for example, in one location, you would add that project point, which looks like a little flag. For the project line, that could be a bike lane, a trail, a sidewalk, and these draw in straight lines. So we know that some trails might not be straight, and that's okay. Just try to draw that project line as accurately as you can. And you can draw multiple lines, multiple points. If, say, you have a road that you're looking for new sidewalks and crosswalks, you only need to draw one line there. You don't need to add points on top of that, that line. And then just make sure that whatever you draw in your community map matches what you describe in your application. So the community score, just to reiterate this, it's based on census tract data, and it's within a half-mile buffer of the lines and points you draw. For projects that cover multiple tracks, the highest score is used, as we saw in that previous example. And at the very bottom, you can put in a project name in the title box and click Save and Return. And then you can actually compare scores of multiple projects in the area that you're looking to see how the scores compare to each other. And now I'm going to turn it over to Melody to start going through the application.
Thank you, Maggie, for that deep dive. And just a quick comment on the scores, just to make sure that we're crystal clear. The project score, which was the first set of criteria Maggie went through, your application must score 52 or higher to even be considered, right, for funding. Once that hurdle is cleared, then the community scores are applied to those proposals that have scored high enough and are eligible. And that community score is used to identify the lower, the higher need applications that are eligible. So the community score is not calculated into, it's not like mathematically part of your project score. It is used as a filter, more or less, to rank the eligible projects that do score high enough in order for IDOT to be able to assign that match level, and also to ensure that 25% of the overall funding goes to the highest need communities. All right, let's go to the application walkthrough. Go ahead, Maggie. Here are the sections of the application, and for those of you who have filled out any kind of a government grant application, they're not all that different from most others, especially not all that different from other transportation grants. There are 8 sections, and we're going to go through each one. So sections 1 and 2, this is pretty straightforward. This is the general information about your project and about the sponsor of the project. So obviously a title of the project, the contact information for the sponsor, name of the primary contact person, and so on and so forth. There are some specific questions here in the early sections about that might throw you for a little bit of a loop. The first one is there's a question that only relates to communities that are within IDOT District 1's jurisdiction. Those are all Chicago Metro communities. They're also all going to be members of member communities of the Chicagoland Metropolitan Agency for Planning. And the question is, what is your mayoral council? And I think anybody who's on here from a municipality in that region knows what was being discussed here, but there are 11 sub-regional councils of government within the CMAP MPO. And so IDOT wants to know which one do you belong? The second question is a little bit wonkier, a little bit stranger. Are you in a transportation management area? And this applies only to the 5 biggest MPOs in Illinois that have populations of over 200,000. And you should know who you are. So if you don't know whether you qualify as a TM, you're in a TMA or not, you can go to Section B of the ITEP guidelines or just contact your Metropolitan Planning Organization or Regional Planning Commission to find out. And then lastly, they'll ask what congressional, federal, and state legislative districts your project falls in. This is automatically populated in the community score, in the community mapping score area of the application. But just in case, you know, something goes wrong or you want to double check, you can always visit these 2 websites to double check. And then, of course, your projects may cross multiple, certainly multiple Illinois legislative districts, potentially congressional districts too. Section 3 is the project category checklist. Once again, you only need to check 1 category. Please don't check more than 1. That will throw your application into a loop. And just to, once again, to clarify, this webinar is only talking about categories 1, pedestrian and bicycle facilities, and category 3, preservation of abandoned railroad corridors to convert to trails. If you have questions about any of the other categories, you're going to need to direct those toward IDOT. Okay, go ahead, Maggie.
All right, so the cost estimates, which I referenced earlier, is very important. So making sure the IDOT uses this information to help them determine if your proposal is eligible or not to be evaluated. So that's why putting together an accurate cost estimate is very important. Having an engineer, an engineering firm do this for you is the way to go forward, because they can help ensure that the work is feasible and meets IDOT and federal criteria. So you'll need to submit both a summary table of your costs and a detailed cost estimate. For the summary table, you're going to include a few different columns, and one of those columns is your local match, and you need to assume in your summary cost table that you will be paying a 20% local match. And if you end up qualifying for the 0% or 10% local match, then your cost estimate will be adjusted later. So don't worry about that. And then you need to include in this table both eligible and ineligible costs. They must be separated. So it's okay if your project has other costs that aren't eligible for ITEP. It's just that you're responsible for those costs, 100% of those costs, and you can find other funding sources potentially to pay for those costs. But you need to separate what is eligible, what is not eligible. And then at the bottom of the summary table, IDOT has a few questions for you to answer. So they ask whether or not you'll move forward with the project if you don't qualify for the reduced local match. So it asks both for the 0% or 10% local match. So make sure you select whatever is appropriate for you, and it's okay if your community or your project won't work for you if you can't pay 20%. They just ask you to check that. And Melody, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just a real quick thing. So it seems a little incongruous, right? At least to me, it took me a beat or two to understand this, and I'm maybe particularly slow on the uptake. But in doing your cost estimate, just assigning 20% of the cost as a local match, as you're instructed to do, does not obligate you to paying 20% local match. Either the state or you, the local, will pay that match. IDOT just wants to know how much is the match obligation, whether they end up contributing to the match 10% or all of it, or whether you, the local, end up contributing to the match. Again, the questions at the bottom as to whether or not you will move forward, whether, or, you know, if it's contingent on your qualifying for a 0 or 10% match, those are the important pieces to remember. So once again, make sure, just go ahead and obligate the 20% of the total project, you know, that you're seeking funding for to the match column. And then it'll be determined later on, if your project is selected, how much of that match you will actually be obligated to pay.
Great, thanks, Mel. So in addition to that particular question, there's also a question about the federal flexible match program, and what that program is. It allows for public or private contributions to be used as part of your local match for construction, and you should indicate here if you will qualify for this. There are a lot more details. There's several pages, I believe, in the ITEP guidelines that really go into details about this. There's some examples, so if that is something that's relevant to you, I would recommend looking in the guidelines. And then the last thing that's asked is, are you applying for other funds? So you're just asked to list what other funding sources you'll be applying to. So, and just a reminder that in the ITEP guidelines, there's a list of eligible sources for the local match, and we wanted to highlight two things here. So we reviewed this in the last webinar, but there are two new items here. One is IDNR grants, so Illinois Department of Natural Resources. That is an eligible source, except for one of their programs. It's their National Recreational Trails program. So that program, unfortunately, cannot be applied to help you meet your local match, but they have other programs that can be used. And then the other update to this list is the very bottom, the Rebuild Illinois bond money. That can only be used for your local match if you're receiving less than $45,000 per distribution. And IDOT really has more of the details about this. We, on that FAQ page on our web page, activetrans.org/ITEP, if you have questions about this, there are more details from IDOT about how this funding source works. And then finally, on the right, there are a few tips and ideas for how you might meet your local match. One thing you could do is, if meeting that local match is a stretch, you could partner with your neighbors or other agencies to help you reduce your total cost share, and that would allow you to split reimbursable costs, and you could split the local match requirement with those partners. You could reach out to foundations or local businesses for local match donations. And you could also check if you have a council of government or mayor, maybe your MPO, you could check with staff there to see, are they able to contribute anything towards your local match, or do they have creative ideas on suggestions to help you find that match money. So the detailed cost estimate, so this is a separate document that you'll be producing and attaching to your application. It should include 8 different items, so it includes, and it shouldn't be missing any of these. So make sure you have all of these items in your cost estimate. So you have an item description, you have units, so that would be like yards or feet. You have the quantity that you need, the unit price, and then again separate the federal share versus the local match versus ineligible costs, and then you have a total cost column. And a few notes about this. So costs should be organized by improvement types. So that could be you have a bike path column, a sidewalk column, landscaping, lighting, street, bridge, and then costs should be displayed separately for each plan phase or location. And what IDOT doesn't want to see is a really one line, so one lump sum for your cost estimate. And they've seen that before, so don't do that. And then also, you're not allowed to include a line item for contingencies or inflation in your cost estimate. And there's a very detailed example in Appendix 7 of what they're looking for. This is a screenshot of part of it. It's on page 64 and 65, so that's a good place to look if you're looking for some more guidance on what they're looking for. And then a couple other notes about this. We have heard from IDOT that many applications are rejected because of this cost estimate piece, because the cost estimate isn't accurate. So IDOT has stressed that successful applications are the ones that have good cost estimates. Depending on staff capacity, some engineering firms are able to offer some support to higher need communities that are in need of assistance, because we know this is a barrier for many communities. So there are some engineering firms that can offer that pro bono support to help you create a cost estimate, develop your project scope. We have a list of firms. We had a survey where we were asking firms like who does have some availability to help, and these firms also are many of them are willing to brainstorm with any community and provide general advice or guidance, and you can also hire them. But one thing to know, you cannot count any type of support or service, pro bono support or service, as an in-kind donation towards the grant's local match requirement. So just keep that in mind. Here we had this survey and we had 14 engineering firms fill out the survey. They have some capacity to provide assistance to a few high need communities, and these firms are color coded by the region of the state that they serve, and there's contact information for these firms on our website again on activetrans.org.
Thanks, Maggie. Okay, so finishing off the application sections, this is again going to seem fairly familiar to most of you. Section A, or in section 5, part A is kind of basically an executive summary, just a brief description of the project. Excuse me, and remember that these narrative sections are all character limited, so figure out how to be as efficient as possible with your words, but while being descriptive. Part B asks about the project relationship to surface transportation, and we had to do a little bit of puzzling through what that actually meant. And this is really a question that originates from the Federal Highways Administration because of the nature of the federal source for part of the funding. FHWA wants to know, how does this project, how is it a surface transportation project, and how is it going to enhance the surface transportation network? So we developed a few questions here, guiding questions that you can ask yourself as you try and answer this section of the application. The most important one, and IDOT confirms with us that this is an important piece, is what is the transportation need and purpose that will be addressed? So you really need to identify that there's something going on here that's not being met. There's a need for people who walk or bike in this area, and it's currently not being met, and how this particular piece of infrastructure is going to address that need. So really kind of make it highly logical, call it out in a way that makes sense, so that it's just apparent that the project is really actually important and necessary. A couple of other questions you can use to help guide your thinking and answering this piece is, how does the project relate to the overall transportation network? So is there like a missing link? between a bikeway and the downtown area? Is there a missing link of sidewalk between a subdivision and a school? All of those kinds of things. So how does it connect to the rest of the network? Hopefully this is not just a one-off project that's off in the middle of a field or something. Obviously that's not going to work. What is the project's proximity to other transportation facilities? Same thing I just mentioned. And what's the relationship to key destinations? Section C asks about the project location. That seems fairly obvious. D is project termini, so the start and end points. Make sure that the description that you put here in the narrative matches what's drawn on your community map. So if the project termini are Oak Street and Main and Oak Street and Elm, make sure that's exactly what's on the community map, or else there will be a discrepancy there. E asks about project length, and that's the length in distance of the facility, not the length in the amount of time that it will take you to build it. So distance. F is proposed scope of work, and this is quite an important section, right? So you need to really detail the description of the project, what it is, you know, what pieces of the work need funding, break down the elements and kind of the timeline and the logical order of progression of the project, how the funds are going to be used to pay for those elements, detail the elements and the progression, and if the project's being proposed is one segment of a larger overall project, please explain that full context, and that's extremely important. So, you know, again, if you're requesting ITEP funding to pay for miles 6 through 8 of an urban trail, you've already built miles 1 through 5, and you have a couple more applications planned for miles 10 through 12, right? Make sure that you're illustrating that so that it does not appear to be, you know, just a piece of infrastructure that doesn't have any connection to anything else. Just make that abundantly clear. Section G is the anticipated benefits, and there are all kinds of ways to make your case in terms of how this proposed project is going to benefit the residents and the folks that live, work, and play in your community. So asking yourself questions like, does this project improve access to jobs, to education, to shopping? So that's the destination piece. Does it increase physical activity and health? Obviously, we're here because of the CDC and they believe in this. Does it reduce congestion in a certain area? Do you anticipate that people are going to switch from driving trips to walking or biking trips? Or even are you connecting people in a certain area to an important transit stop or station? And how will that impact people's decision whether to drive, and the emissions and greenhouse gases and people's respiratory health? Is there increased social equity for non-driving populations? And I can think of all kinds of examples of this. Is there a senior center in your community where folks are essentially, you know, stranded because they no longer are in their driving years and they need to get to the local grocery store? Is there a community of mobile homes that is on a busy highway that lacks an opportunity to get to a local job center? And a bike lane would really improve that ability, so on and so forth. There's a link here from the benchmarking report that is produced by the League of American Bicyclists. It has all kinds of statistics and ways that you can make your case, and not just for bicycling facilities, but also for walking and trail facilities. Section H asks you to describe how the project will improve safety. So this is a little bit more unique. You can obviously include safety as one of the benefits in Section G, but this specifically calls out, you know, are you going to help people stay safer when they're walking and biking? And so we highly recommend you check local crash data with your police department and with IDOT. That there's a data portal for that, and you know, utilize that to help make your case. Finally, we're getting to the end here. Section 6 is about the project relationship to other planned improvements. So again, we talked about this a little bit. Is it a standalone project or part of a larger one? This is extremely important. The second bullet, if you have had ITEP funding in the past that has funded a piece or a portion of this project, you need to really call that out and let IDOT know what happened with that project and how this is going to expand or add capacity or a benefit to that project. And then the predicted usage is really kind of just doing your best to estimate how many people, how many pedestrians, how many bicyclists you believe will be utilizing this facility. And that can be, that's a little hard to estimate often, but there are ways to, if you wanted to really get into the weeds with that, there are ways to do that, those estimates. And then predicted usage, just like, if it's a multi-use trail, we anticipate, 40% of the usage will be by pedestrians and 60% by bicyclists or something like that. Then land acquisition and easement. IDOT wants to know who currently owns the land. If it's you, the municipality, that's great. If not, they want to know how the property will be purchased, if this is an issue at all, but what property does need to be purchased and your plan for that. Finally, the last two pieces of section 6 of question number 6 are project readiness and public involvement. Maggie has talked about this, and as we're going along, I'm sure you can see that the scoring criteria, there's a place in the application where each element of the scoring criteria directly ties to what they're asking you to show and prove up. So project readiness, Maggie already went over some of this. But if physical engineering 1 or 2 is underway or complete, that will advance your project readiness score. If right-of-ways have already been secured, if a local match has already been secured, if you're expecting to pay some of that yourself, and then how far in the future do you anticipate construction could actually happen? And then again, finally, public involvement. A government resolution is required, and we have a question about that in the chat that we'll get to in a moment. Public meetings, if there were any public meetings that were held specifically for this project, or even for the supporting plan or other document or other process that was conducted, if you have a comprehensive plan, or if your community has a bike or ped plan and there was a community involvement engagement activities that were done around that, include that summary, attach whatever you've got to bolster the fact that public support does exist. And then letters of support from whomever. I know that a lot of communities are really creative about getting this, from homeowners group locally, or a local hospital, or certainly school districts and park districts and all of those usual suspects, but kind of think outside the box. Talk to your county public health department, talk to the local YMCA, even, Girl Scout troops, Boy Scout troops, anyone that you think would benefit from having this facility here and can really explain why. That will all help. Section 7 is about the maintenance requirement. So IDOT really just wants to know that you are committed to maintaining this facility in the future, that once it's built, and we've used state and federal resources to build it, that you are dedicated to making sure that that facility continues to be viable. So they are asking things like, do you have a maintenance plan for this particular facility, or community-wide? What is your community resurfacing plan, or what is your community's sidewalk patching and repair process? How often do you go around and repair the entire network? Those kinds of things. They'll want to know if you have the proper maintenance equipment. They'll want to know who is performing that maintenance, if you have a public works department or it's some other department in your community. And how do you fund maintenance in your community? Is there a line item in your annual city budget? how do you make sure that that gets funded? And then I'm going to turn this over to Maggie, but the application documents are the last section.
All right, thanks, Mel. So what you additionally need to include in your application, one is all of your GATA pre-award requirements, so that documentation, the detailed cost estimates, your community score, you need to include that as a separate document. There should be a community score page after you use that map, including colored photographs of your project area, there's a local assurance page where in the application where someone needs to sign off on the project. The government resolution that Melody mentioned is required, so it just shows that your local government has approved the project, and we have an example of a resolution that IDOT gave us that we added to the activetrans.org/ITEP page that you can have a look at if you needed that, showing the public involvement, those how the public has showed support, and then finally letters of support that Melody was just talking about. And to submit your application, so you need to submit both the application online and you need to mail in a hard copy, so an unbound hard copy, just one, as well, and with all of the supporting documents that I just spoke about, and you mail those to the IDOT Springfield office. Your hard copy needs to contain a 6-digit ITEP number that you get after you submit your online application. So first you need to submit the online application, and then you need to add that number to your hard copy. And the hard copy and supporting documents need to be received by IDOT in Springfield before the November 2nd deadline. So really, you need to tell yourself that the deadline is sometime the end of October to make sure you get everything in on time. And then finally, this is our last slide. So the sunset clause. If you're awarded funds, your notification letter will contain specific deadlines for each project based on the phases of work that were approved. And if your project includes construction, the rule is that construction must begin within a maximum of 4 years. If your project is only for phase 1 or 2 engineering, then that engineering must be completed within 4 years, and then construction of your project must begin within 10 years, so it's slightly different. If any deadline can't be met, funds may be rescinded, and the project will be considered dropped unless an extension is requested and approved. There's in the ITEP guidelines, it's section J, it's page 36. There are more details about that, but just keep this in mind as you're applying. So that is it from Melody and myself. We can start, going into the questions that you've typed out, and we actually have some IDOT staff on the call as well who may be able to answer questions that Melody and I don't necessarily have the expertise in. So let's see, we welcome your questions now.
Yeah, so why don't we, if the IDOT folks could unmute themselves, we'll start at the top of this chat list and kind of go on down the way. And Maggie, if you want to just ping pong calling them out. We're going to also handle this in the same way that we handled it last time, which was answer as many questions live as we can, but we will be grabbing all of these questions, putting them into a Q&A that we will post on our website that we will constantly update as we get more questions through email and whatnot. And also just a quick note that if you have follow-up questions after this, Though Maggie is brilliant and an expert, and I am somewhat useful, your local IDOT district or the dot.itep@illinois.gov email address is probably going to be a better bet, because we're speaking as advocates and we don't have the final answer. We can be helpful and give you tips, but the final word should probably come from IDOT. So. All right, I will start with the first one. There's a question from Richard Chambers. I think we answered this, Richard. That is median income determined by median household income or median income by employer? It's by employee, it's household income. Next question. How do we write the resolution when the city commits to funds, but is also hoping for the state to pay the full match? So I'm going to hand that one off to IDOT, but I guess the question is, how do you show a city's commitment and a resolution toward dedication of building the facility, but they are hoping not to have to pay the 20%?
Hi, this is Misty Dateman. I would say it's a bit of a tricky situation, since we can't really determine at the point of the application how much of a local match needs to be provided, if any. So the resolution needs to cover that if they are willing to provide either the 10% match or the 20% match, if they don't receive state matching funds, that they're willing to provide that. And they also need to understand that they're responsible for the maintenance costs of the project after it's completed. And we'll use a combination of the resolution along with those questions that are included on the cost estimate sheet in the application, to understand how the locals, whether they want to move forward with the project if they aren't going to receive state help for their match.
So I guess you would need to just craft the resolution in such a way that accurately explains what the community is able to commit to. If you are unable, for those questions, if you're unable to proceed with the project without a 10% or 0% match, then you should probably detail that in your resolution. Next question. Could someone please explain the details of land acquisition prior to funding? I'm passing that to IDOT.
This is Greg Lupton from Bureau Local Roads. And I don't know, Missy, if the land acquisition prior to funding, I guess need a little bit more information, but are they talking about land that was prior purchase to the application, or land that they are anticipating purchasing? So it kind of makes a little bit of a difference. I don't know, Missy.
There's a similar question also that asks about if land acquisition is in process, discussions are underway, but it's not finalized. How would you go about explaining that? And does that make a project eligible if it's in process?
Maybe I have to do a little bit more research on that, just make sure I'm not leading in the wrong direction here. So.
That is no problem. We'll put a pin in that one and come back to it later.
Okay.
And again, everyone on this call will be getting a follow-up email from us once those Q&As are posted on our website. Question is, will IDOT reimburse for costs related to preparation of phase 1 engineering? I'm not sure I quite understand that either. Does anyone from IDOT understand what's meant by that?
Typically with federal funds, no work is eligible for federal reimbursement until we get federal authorization from the FHWA, which generally means we have the project's been selected. We've already gone through got a joint agreement started, and at that point, we give the okay to begin phase 1 work. Prior to that, it would be ineligible for the federal funds anyway.
Right, right. And I'm hearing Missy echoing in my head that you cannot apply for support for work that happens before the start of the notice to proceed for the project. So if you did preliminary work and stuff, you can't use any of the money for anything that happened before the project starts. There's a question here about community size. How do we determine community size? And I think that's been answered by the population question. It's the population that is, it's the total population within a half a mile of the project in the census tracts. So it's not the entire community, but it's within half a mile of the project itself in the census tracts that are adjacent. Okay, I think we answered that one. Does the score take into consideration data from external sets like Strava to focus on number of cyclists on a route? I can pretty much answer that one. It's no, but there is certainly an opportunity, I think, in the narrative to include that if you are able to extract that data and you want to use it as a basis to demonstrate the need that, we have this many people riding bicycles in this area already, and it's really, there's obviously a compelling need for a better infrastructure. Anyone else want to add to that? Okay.
I think you covered it well. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Let's see, more questions about how population is calculated. We'll go into the details of those and see if there's anything that we haven't answered so far, so don't panic. This is an interesting one. So the application sample of the cost estimate page says, quote, IDOT will not accept this form as a submission for the ITEP program. So they're asking if it's okay to use the application sample once they, the sample of the cost estimate once they fill it out for themselves, or is there a different form that's required?
So that form is pretty much an identical copy of the one that is included in the online application that they'll have to fill out. So we need them to provide the information within the online application. That's basically what that means. Okay. And then they can provide that, when they print out their application and submit it to us, that will be included in that. And then we would like to have the expanded cost estimate provided as well.
Okay, so it's both. I think, is the disclaimer just because that's the sample, that you can't submit this sample? I don't know if that's what that...
Yeah, because we have to have it within the online application.
Okay, great. Next question. With the Fed dollars at 30 million and state at 105 million, I'm not sure I understand that. Does the Fed and state assumed at 80%? I'm not sure what that means. But the state and federal dollars are both using the 80-20 match calculation, right? Go ahead, Missy.
Okay, sorry. For some of the items, there is actually normally a 50% federal match to a 50% local match. So for those items, if it were in a high need community, we would provide the additional match for those items, if that's what that question was trying to ask.
Yes, yeah, and we actually covered some of that in the first webinar, so you can check that out. The areas where they would normally be asking for a 50-50 match, but if you're in a high need community, it will move to the 80-20.
And also the it's 105.6 million total. In the state dollars, it's around 75 million. That is just for walking, biking, and trail projects.
Right.
I know that wasn't part of the question, but just to clarify that.
Right. So that's the reason we're putting on this webinar, because there's a whole lot of ped bike trail money available, a whole lot. And we want to generate as much interest as humanly possible. Let's see. Okay, we answered that one. If phase 1 is complete and paid for by the local agency, does it need to be added to the estimate? I think the answer to that is no. Is that correct?
I think it would be useful if they could show in some manner that they have actually paid for the phase 1 engineering on their own. It shows their additional commitment to the project and that they're actually willing, you know, in some instances when a local will come back and ask for an increase, it's helpful to know that they've been willing in the past to put forth an extra amount of money towards towards the project.
Missy, is that something that they can do on the cost estimate sheet or in the narrative?
That is a very good question.
Well, we'll put a pin in it, and we'll post that one too. Can rolling the contingency into the unit price cause the cost estimate to be considered inaccurate? This is a contingency question. Who wants to take it?
I suppose it could potentially. I mean, we're really looking for a relatively accurate, as good as we can get at the time, estimate, which, you know, you would have to consider, you know, if it's going to be months or a year ahead of time, you know, you'd have to factor in a little bit of inflation. Now, you could get to the point where it, you know, the contingency is inflating those costs so much that it would throw up some red flags as far as, you know, not being reasonable. But really, we're looking for as accurate of a estimate as we can get. And it is just an estimate at that point. So.
Great. Thank you. We have a note from some folks from Horner and Schifrin that they have offices in Region 1 and Region 5. If focusing on districts, they're in District 1, District 8. So we will follow up with you all later, get your information, and add you to our list of firms that are willing to work with locals on a pro bono basis. Let's see here. Oh, here's a good one. Since private universities are not eligible applicants, can they contribute toward the local match for an eligible sponsor? And if so, how would that be detailed in an application? Intergovernmental agreement or a resolution, etc.
Greg, do you have any idea? I would have to research that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I think they probably could contribute, but again, we'd probably have to verify that.
Okay, we'll get back to you on that. There's a question about crash data, the crash data portal. That's an easy one. Is there a link to that portal that we could provide for folks? IDOT?
We do. There is the crash data portal, but I think access is limited to counties, you know, police departments, but we can provide the link. I'm not sure how accessible it will be to, you know, generally speaking. So it's kind of restricted on who can access it, but we can provide that link if it would be of use.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and provide it. And if you're unable to, oh, I'm getting a text, getting a message from one of my colleagues who says, Heather says that you can request the crash data through your IDOT district office or your county DOT.
Yeah, and that's probably the best way to do it anyway. So
great. On showing support from the public, do we need certified minutes for public meetings, or can we just use documentation that was collected at the time of the engagement event?
I don't know that we would need minutes from a meeting, but just documentation of some sort that they do have community support, a letter of support from the, if there's a, like you said, an organization, the Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts or some other active community group that could provide letters of support or.
Okay, great. Only a couple more questions. We might get to them all here. Does a 3-ring binder with removable pages count as unbound when submitting a hard copy?
Yes, that'd be fine.
Okay. The online ITEP application asks that applicants submit a GATA registration number. Where would they find that number as they complete an application? I'm assuming that after you've gone through the GATA process that a number is generated and sent to you. Any differing opinions on that?
No, sorry, I've not gone through that process. I assume that, yes, they would receive that number after they've gone through the process. And at this point, the pre-award information for most communities has probably already been completed.
Right, yeah. Can a municipality submit multiple applications? We've answered this one before, but go ahead, someone from IDOT comment on that one.
Yes, they can.
Yep. Is replacing a pedestrian bridge eligible or considered maintenance?
That one is a difficult question to answer without knowing the specifics. I do know that there have been instances where a large pedestrian bridge on an existing ITEP project has been replaced, and I'm not sure how that was done.
Okay, so maybe check with
Those can be rather expensive projects, right, I would think. So I would, we'd have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, I think, but I would think they should submit the application for us to review, because the path is already there and it's hampering anybody's ability to use it.
Right, okay. Is the $2 million funding cap the project maximum, or can the project be over, say 2.5, if the local community will pay the difference? I think the answer to that is yes. That's what that final column on the cost estimate is for, to show that if it's a bigger project than the project cap, that there's a commitment to pay for the rest. Am I correct on that?
Yes, you are.
Okay, great. May a city municipality apply on their own behalf, or must the region's RPC MPO apply for them? For example, the city of Rockford. I believe these are direct applications from municipalities to IDOT, but you absolutely will want your MPO and RPC to know, as they'll have to be compatible with any regional plans that are out there. So you wouldn't want to do this in isolation without being in consultation with your MPO or RPC. But no, the MPO does not submit for you. You would submit on your own. Let's see. We're almost at the end here. There's still more questions on the land acquisition question, so we'll make sure we dig into that for when we post. One more minute. Is there any way that a project can account for visitors to the project area for the community calculation? We're a very small community that has a state park with a reported 450,000 annual visitors.
Assuming they're talking about the community map score for that question, and no,
Yes.
it won't take into consideration the visitors. That would be something that they would want to provide to us in the application itself when they're answering some of those questions.
Right. In purpose and need, and your estimated usage, all those kinds of things. I think you could detail that. Well, we are out of time, and I don't want to hold anybody past our 90 minutes. Thank you all for hanging in there with us. This has been terrific. There are a number of questions still unanswered, so we will absolutely get to those, and once they are ready for prime time, we will send you an email and let you know. Anything else from Maggie or Sarah?
Nothing else from me. Just thanks everyone for joining, and we'll be following up, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'm going to be on vacation for the next 2 weeks, so you might not hear from me, but I'll get back to you when I return, and good luck.
Yeah, and in the meantime, there's always your local IDOT district or your county or your MPO. So don't wait for us.
Yes.
All right, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.